Hello there. Today I watched the new action thriller King of Killers, and now I want to tell you about it. Written and directed by Kevin Griveau, the story follows an assassin named Marcus Garon, played by Alain Moussi. Left struggling to pay his daughter's medical bills, Garon finds himself accepting an invitation to hunt a deadly foe. When he arrives, he finds 7 other assassins all facing the same challenge as him. They must take on the world's most dangerous man, Jorg Dracos, played by Frank Grillo. Normally, I'd give my thoughts at the end, but I think I should be upfront in saying that this film is awful. It doesn't do any part of the production well, it hampers its own redeeming features, and the dialogue is so unbelievably bad that I struggled to make it through the film. It's easily one of the worst films I've seen all year, and you shouldn't even attempt to watch it unless you're some form of masochist. Having said all that, I'm still going to briefly go over it. Let's start with the writing. The characters are boring. The plot unfolds in an overly contrived manner. The writer has little understanding of how knives work or how quickly humans bleed out, and this film manages to include some of the worst Hollywood tropes of the last few years. It doesn't make any sense, and while it still could have been an exciting story, it ends up being boring because you never get invested in the characters. It also ends with the worst surprise twist I've ever seen. It doesn't make a lick of sense, and it's a cliffhanger. The characters are all one-note stereotypes, and the film does very little to develop any of them aside from the main character. Most of the character development comes in the form of exposition dumping from Frank Grillo, and the little bit of time we spend with the assassins before they face off against Dracos. The main character is a nondescript action hero working for a nondescript letter organization. He's got a generic military background, his wife and kid don't know what he does for a living, and he loves to spit out one-liners every chance he gets. The villain is your generic mastermind assassin. He holds all the cards, he's ruthless while also being rather emotionless. The other assassins are all rowdy action heroes, with similar personalities and only minor variations between them. They all serve essentially the same purpose though. They're cannon fodder to show how tough the antagonist is before the main character faces him. The plot feels overly contrived and predictable from the start. The biggest example is how they got the main character to accept the invite in the first place. He doesn't want to be involved because of his daughter, and then all of a sudden she gets sick, and somehow a world-class assassin can't afford her medical treatment. The villain is an invincible monster that gets stabbed, slashed, beaten, and shot, and yet somehow survives it all. He should have been dead half of a dozen times in the film, but his character just gets right back up and keeps swinging. In the end, rather than just ending the story, they decide to throw out everything that happened in the film, give an expositional monologue that sets up another film and redeems the villain, and then they revive one of the dead assassins. None of it makes sense, it all comes out of left field, and it completely changes the rest of the story. Cast-wise, this film is filled with wooden performances and some decent little stunt work. The 7 assassins are all monotone people playing action heroes. None of them make a good impression, and several of them give awkward line deliveries. The majority of the screen time goes to Alain Moussi, who does his best to make something out of the dialogue, but he ends up putting on a wooden performance as well. He delivers every line with little emotion and has as much charisma as a wet paper bag. He pulls off some decent stunts during the fights, but his work there is overshadowed by the poor lighting. Frank Grillo as the villain is the most interesting performance in the film, but it's far from the best work Grillo has done in his career. Like Moussi, he's trying to make the dialogue work, but even with a lot more experience, he can't do it. Visually, this film struggles with bad lighting and poorly thought out scenes. It's both confusing and hard to follow because it often skips around with its focus and doesn't do a good job of capturing the action. It leads to a disjointed feeling in which you are unsure of how you got from point A to B, and it leaves you completely dissatisfied with the journey. On top of that, every single scene is poorly lit. From start to finish, the actors are working in the dark, and it ends up ruining most of the action. You can't even see the choreography half of the time, you can just hear the sound effects they added in afterward. There's a whole fight between Dracos and a character called Cord, in which Dracos stabs and slashes Cord repeatedly while Cord slams Dracos into different walls and hammers him with punches. We see almost none of it and mostly just hear the 2 men struggling with the occasional sound of a knife slicing flesh. It's incredibly lame, and it happens in just about every single fight in the film. Sound-wise, the film makes use of background instrumentals to try and build out the atmosphere behind the scenery. It does an okay job of getting the emotions right, but often the songs are generic and boring sounding tracks that don't stand out. They're in the right ballpark, but they just don't fit well enough with the scenery to be interesting. Overall, King of Killers is a poorly made film that I can't imagine anyone willingly finishing. The story is contrived nonsense, the characters are all boring stereotypes, the cast gives wooden performances, and the creators shot themselves in the foot by not lighting the scenes properly. The only redeeming feature is the semi-decent stunt work in the film, but it's all too dark to see. If you want to see an action film, there are plenty of decent films to watch instead of this. As for a rating, I'd give this film a 1 out of 10, and remember, these are just my thoughts on the film. Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. Bye bye!